Welcome to this brand new chapter. We're getting close to the end of the course, and I could absolutely not have a course labeled Advanced Front Ends without at least touching on Three.js. So what is Three.js? Well, essentially, it is a library that allows you to implement 3D elements on the web. And what I mean by on the web means on your website. And you can also do a bunch of other stuff with this. It's an extremely vast framework. It's very powerful, and it utilizes the HTML canvas element. And inside of that canvas element, you have an entire world that you can control outside of the traditional parameters of web development, such as with HTML, CSS. So with it, like I said, you can import and animate and interact with 3D elements and objects. And you can also do what's called shaders, and you can adjust and create really interesting interactions and animations with what are called shaders. So let me just show you a few examples here. You can go to Three.js.org, and there's a bunch of examples plastered right on the front page, and the newest ones are in the top left, going from left to right. And it just kind of gives you an idea of some of the projects and things that people create with this. So for instance, this camera. This camera is fully 3D, and it's on a web page. And you do this with the help of Three.js. Notice it's also interactive. I'm using my mouse scroll wheel, and look how this element is literally just moving around. We are going to do this. I'm going to show you exactly how to do this, and also while having a user interface with HTML and CSS around it. Let's show you just one other example, for instance. Let's take a look at this one. This one is pretty interesting. Look at these wavy effects, and look how they're interacting with the mouse position. This is done with what's called shaders. Now, we're really not going to get too much into actual shaders, because shaders is a very, very advanced topic within Three.js alone. My strength is not within Three.js. However, I do know enough to where we can import 3D elements, and we can customize them, we can move them around, and we can interact with them with the help of JavaScript and specifically GreenSock Animation Platform. So that's what we're going to be doing. I do want to mention, if you really want to get the most out of Three.js, you should check out this course, Three.js-Journey. If you go there, it's Three.js-Journey.com. And this is by Bruno Simon. I've actually spoken with Bruno multiple times as a fellow educator. And he has pretty much the most popular course on Three.js. I am not affiliated with Three.js. I've only talked to Bruno maybe a couple years ago. I'm not trying to promote his course, and I don't get a kickback. I just highly recommend it. It's $95, and it is over 72 hours of actual content on Three.js. You can make games with this, and people do. So I just wanted to throw that out there. If you are intrigued by what you're about to learn, then definitely check out Three.js-Journey.com to get a way more robust overlook and training compared to what you're about to receive here. However, having said that, you're still going to be able to do a lot with the basics that you learn in my course. So let's go ahead, and I want to show you a GitHub page. This I actually uploaded 2 years ago. I took his course over 2 years ago, and I created this boilerplate. When it comes to Three.js and setting up the basic scene, it's a lot of boilerplate work. So I created this, and this is what we're going to go ahead and copy. So what I want to do is I'm going to copy this URL right up here, and I have Visual Studio Code open. And right now, if I look at the bottom here, I am in a folder, and you can go to your code folder if you wish. And by the way, go to View and then Terminal to see what I see here. And what I want to do, I'm going to hit CLS to clear that so you can kind of see what I'm about to type. And all I'm going to do is type in git clone and then paste in that URL by right-clicking. Now, of course, you have to have Git installed on your computer, and being that this is an advanced front-ends course, I hope you already do. If you don't, go ahead and Google how to get Git installed so that you can use it at the command line. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Enter. All right. So now we could see we have this folder right here. So it just cloned that repo essentially. So now if I go back and I hit open folder and we go back to One Basics, and I'm just going to type, I'm going to rename this to before. Oh, actually it's already open. No big deal. I'll just go ahead and double click into it and select the folder to open it. Here we are. This is what the source code looks like in the folder structure. So don't worry about the bundler part. We can see we have index, and it's literally just a single canvas element. So when you want to integrate your 3JS of some sort, many times it's literally just a single canvas element. And then over at the CSS, very minimal CSS as well. We just have this part, and then we have WebGL, which is the class that's applied to that canvas element. We could just put canvas, as a selector. Position fixed, very important to note that. You don't have to make it position fixed, by the way. But one of the common use cases, if you want like a floating element that stays in view, even when you're scrolling down the page, you can put position fixed on that element, and that 3D element will always stay in there if that's how you program it as such. And then so that's basically it. Very minimal CSS. And now let's take a look at the JavaScript. So there's a lot of setup work with the JavaScript, but most of it, you can kind of set it and forget it. All right, so let's start with here. I'm just going to describe a few of these before we actually launch this project so you can see what this boilerplate does out of the box. So up here at the top, I'm going to zoom up here. We have our style CSS that we're importing. We're importing all from 3, which is the actual 3JS NPM name. We have orbit controls. This isn't even being used, but it will be used. I'll show you what that is. And then we're importing all as dat from dat.gui. And this right here is a utility class that helps you see all of the animatable properties associated perhaps with a potential element or a 3D object. And you can adjust those parameters with a little GUI, graphical user interface, that shows up on the upper right-hand portion. We'll go ahead and look at this in another lesson, probably in the next lesson as well. Then we have .gui. We can ignore this right now. And then we have our canvas element. So this is the first step that we define it as the canvas, actual canvas element. We have a scene. So everything is contained within a scene. Okay, very standard. And then we have our objects. In this case, we're only going to have one object. We have a torus right here. It's called torus geometry. And there's a bunch of different types of primitives, as they call them, or geometry that you can add right out of the box that is baked within 3JS. You can also import your own custom 3D elements that you either purchased or downloaded from somewhere or made yourself from scratch, like in a 3D application like Blender or 3D Studio Max, Cinema 4D, etc. And so I want to show you just a couple real quickly based on the documentation. This is the 3JS docs. All right, just go to Google, type 3JS docs or whatever, and you'll find it. And you'll see right down here, if I scroll down far enough, geometries. All right, so we have a bunch. We have a box. It's like a rectangle. Click on that. It'll show you a preview. So this is just a standard box. It shows you how to use it as well. So remember, we already saw const geometry. We saw the torus geometry being used. Well, this is what it looks like when you just want a simple rectangle. All right, and you have parameters, and they are described right here. So going from left to right, where it says 1, 1, 1, well, we have width. So that's this first one corresponds to the width. Second is height, and then depth. All right, and then there's optional like width segments, height segments, and all this other stuff, and it'll tell you what they essentially do. So the torus geometry, we'll see right down here. That's the one that we're going to see when we run this project in a little bit. And as you can see, remember I talked about dat.gui? This is what it is. So it allows you to change these various properties that you can specify in JavaScript in a graphical user interface concept like this with a progress bar, essentially. So if you want it to be really low, low poly count, you can go for that, or you can go for really high. Just understand that the more segments you have with these various geometries, the less performant it will be. But a lot of times, with modern, especially if you stick to like desktop, or if you want to hide certain things, you can really go up and boost the counts, because desktops and GPUs are really quite powerful these days. So let's go back and I'll continue on describing what's also happening here. So we have our geometry. That's the first step when you want to get an actual element present within the Three.js canvas. So next up, you have to have a material to attach onto that geometry. So think of the geometry as your bones, and then the material as your skin. And so right here, we're defining a material of Three.js, or 3 mesh basic material. There's a bunch of different materials, just like there's a bunch of different types of geometry. Once again, if I go back, I did not mean to click that button. So if we go back here, if we look at materials, you'll see that there's a bunch of different types of materials as well. So this is, again, the skin, essentially, of the 3D object. And again, we click on these and they give you examples of what these look like. So this is a Lambert material. This is a depth material. And again, you could play around with all the different settings. Mesh basic material, that's what we essentially have. You have a bunch of different interesting materials that you can utilize. Some do have previews and others don't. Okay, so once you have that, in this right here, we're designated a color on the mesh basic material. This is going to be a red. So this is just a hex code color value. And then once you have the bones, which is the geometry, and then you have the skin, which is the material, you then go ahead and you create a new mesh right here, which is what this line is. You pass in the geometry in the first parameter, and then the material in the second, and then you add it to the scene through scene.add, the method. You also can add lights. In this case, there's one light that's being added. Again, like materials and like the 3D objects, the geometry, there's a bunch of different types of lights. You could have point lights, ambient lights, pin lights, a bunch of stuff. And you can also position all these things. And we can position the geometry as well in the scene. All right, so you can add the scene just the same way you add a geometry, like right there. And then all the stuff underneath this, for the most part, is just boilerplate, set and forget. So this is kind of like responsive considerations right here for the sizes. If the window is resized, we need to update the canvas element right here. Again, set and forget. We have the camera position as well. We also have a renderer. Again, set and forget. Don't worry too much about this stuff. And then we have some animation in here, where through request animation frame, which is a very performant way of dealing with animation, we could do things like take our geometry, which is we named sphere, which is the torus, and we could tie into rotation, into the y-axis, and then make it move based on a little bit of math with an elapsed time element right here. So let's go ahead and what does it take to get this up and running? So if I hit Control B, let's go to View Terminal. All right, we have to do npm install. You want to run that. So this means you need access to the Node Package Manager. If you don't have that installed, just go to Google and type in how to install Node.js. Again, this is a advanced course, so hopefully you're at that point already. And once you have that installed, you can then type npm run dev. Now, npm is literally a letter, and you can't see it right now. Here, let's do this. If I move this over here, there you go, npm run dev. Sorry about my very messy desktop. So let's run that. And this is gonna load up a server, and this is what it is. Look at this. It's not the most exciting thing you've ever seen, but this is beginning, the very beginning tutorial. This is what you want, simplicity. Now it's rotating explicitly because of that line that was tied into the request animation frame. And so I just wanted to show you a couple things real quick before we get into an actual project in the next lesson where we do something cool with interactivity. So over here, let's just scale things down a bit. Control B. So let's say, for instance, that you wanted to change the color of this. Again, you could just change the color FFCC00. That's going to make it like a yellow. What if you wanted to change the background? Well, right now it's black. Many times and this is going to be our use case, we want it to be transparent so that we can see the user interface behind it. Assuming, of course, we want our 3D elements on top of the UI, which you don't have to. You can place things on top of it as well. Remember, we have CSS, which can take that canvas element and set the Z index at, in any range so that we can have elements that are overlapped on top of each other. So what we would do if we wanted to make that a transparent background is we take a look at the renderer, all right? We put a comment right here and we say alpha true. When we save this and we go back, it's going to be a white background. This is the actual web page background. So we have this 3D element that's kind of just floating there in space, but there's nothing behind it. So let me show you real quick, and you don't have to follow along for this part of the tutorial. We can go back to our index.html. We can put an H1. We'll say rotation. We'll save it. Let's go back to script, because by default, if we look at that, it's going to be way up there. If we just take our body element, display grid, place content center. You wouldn't want to do this because there's an HTML and body selector. I'm just doing this just for demonstration purposes. And we save that. We'll see that then it's in the center, but let's make that H1 a lot bigger. Let's say like 15 rem units. We'll save it. And now we can see that we have a regular element, our regular text or whatever our UI looks like behind a floating element. And what's really cool is if, for instance, we change this from height 100 to 300, because we used place content center, it's kind of in the middle right here. But look at that. We can now create, it stays there because we used position fixed. But what's even cooler, which I will show you, in this chapter and in the final lesson, likely, or final project rather, we can also move this element around. We can change the color, we can change the shape, we can change the properties, like for instance, like how thick this torus is, based on scroll position or based on an interactivity like clicking or something like that. So we're going to do all this really cool stuff. And again, just to really quickly demonstrate, for perhaps if we want to modify like the position of this element. So we have our sphere. All we have to do is type sphere.position.x equals, and we could put negative values here if we want. So like -1, what is that going to do? Pushes it way over there. 2 will push it way off to the right. So we can actually tween from these properties using GSAP to really make nice smooth movements, whether that's based on scroll or based on a click or a hover or whatever. So you have a lot of control. So I think that's going to be it for me right here, just for this quick demonstration purpose. In the next lesson, we're going to start from scratch, and we're going to actually create something that is very cool within the context of Three.js.